Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Madalena, are we ready to go? Great, yes, great. Okay, so welcome, everybody, whether you're here live with us or watching on Facebook or watching at a later time. I'm Rabbi Bracha Gershuny, and I'm delighted to be here teaching the series on the history of the Jewish calendar. And today, in our third part, we're going to be looking at how the rabbis developed the calendar, particularly in response to events in their own immediate lifetimes or in living memory, and events that had happened not exactly in living memory, but since the period of the Torah, and particularly since the period of the Babylonian exile, which was probably when the Bible began to be edited into something approaching its current, or even began to be edited together as a document. So they're going to be, and I had mentioned that we would also be looking at the development of the days of awe, the high holy days. We're not going to do that today. There's too many other fascinating things to get into. So just to give you an overview of where we'll be going with class today, we're going to look at 3 or 4 different topics. Firstly, we'll look fairly briefly at the development of the idea of having fast days in commemoration of collective tragedies. As we'll see, we have this idea already in the book of Zechariah, which we'll take a look at together. But we'll see how the rabbis use these occasions to connect recent memory, slightly less recent memory, and mythic memory, to sort of weave these days into the fabric of their worldview and to make them kosher, basically. Then we're going to look a little bit more about our identification with the moon and lunar cycles. We've already discussed how important the moon and the movement of the moon is to the structure of the Jewish calendar. Something that we see in the rabbinic period is the development of a pretty strong current identifying Israel with the moon itself, and all the ways that it's actually, there are disadvantages to being the moon relative to being the sun, but there are also advantages to being the moon relative to being the sun. And this idea is made pretty explicit that, Rome is like the sun and Israel's like the moon. And though its fortunes wane and wax and wane over time, it has this power to renew itself, as well as some other ideas. So that's the first half. And then in the second half of the class, we're going to look at a fascinating document that I must admit I had no idea existed. I wonder if anybody here has ever heard of Megillat Ta'anit. Not to be confused with Masechet Ta'anit from the Mishnah, and not to be confused with Megillat Esther or any of the other Megillas. Megillat Ta'anit is a document from around this time, the Second Temple period, which institutes for Israel about 35 additional festive days of the year. You thought we had a lot of Jewish holidays. There used to be about 35 more. If they didn't have specific practices, they were at least days on which it was not permitted to fast and undertake mourning practices. And if, like on Rosh Chodesh, if there's a funeral, you don't give a full hesped. So these were days where mourning was restricted because there were recollections of joyous times, of good things that had happened in Jewish history. However, around the time, by the time of the Mishnah and the development into the Talmud, these holidays, almost all, except for 2, got cancelled. And the rabbis in a number of places in the Mishnah and the Yerushalmi and the Bavli discuss whether say, this document is being cancelled. And others say, no, this document hasn't been cancelled. But certainly they thought it was in effect, or they wouldn't have needed to cancel it. And pop quiz, what were the 2 holidays from Megillat Ta'anit that did survive into our times? Take a guess. You can put it in the chat or unmute yourself as you wish. It's you might know these holidays. No, the 15th of Av was already there, actually, because the 15th of Av has biblical roots, and then it's there in the. That's a good question whether the 15th of Av is actually in Megillat Tani. Let's look that up. Bigger than that, more famous than that. What are the two main holidays that? No, Shavuot and Sukkot were already there. Those are from the Bible. Those are from the Torah. What are the two big post-Torah holidays that we know very clearly are not in the Torah? But yes, Purim and Hanukkah. Yeah, Purim and Hanukkah. So there's discussion about why did Purim and Hanukkah stay when all the other ones get cancelled, and then we're going to look a little bit more about Purim and Hanukkah, because obviously there are elements of Purim and Hanukkah, both Purim and Hanukkah, and they're, I think, treated quite differently by the rabbis. There are elements of the stories that are very problematic for them, and other elements that they like. Also, we'll look at how the rabbis sort of doctored Purim and Hanukkah and treated the texts to conform with rabbinic Judaism's agenda and make these holidays what I would call kosher for the Jewish tradition. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff. Hope that you find it interesting too. I certainly learned a lot as I was preparing for this class. So let us start. Let's start with a blessing on Torah study, and then Madalena, I'll post the source sheet link again. And actually, I want to post it to everybody. All right, there we go. And Madalena, if you can also share the screen for us. Let's dive in. So blessed are you, source of all creation, source of all inspiration, who makes us holy through these practices of steeping ourselves in words of Torah. May it be your will that this Torah flows through us and connects to those whom we touch with our minds and our deeds, with the sweetness of their inspiration and their revelation. And may all be inspired to come close in study and in practice for the sake of learning itself. Blessed are you, great teacher, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. Okie doke. So here our first section is relating to fast days. So as we can see, we already have in the book of Zechariah. Zechariah was writing in the period of the first exile, after the first temple had been destroyed, and in the hopes that the temple would be reestablished, which indeed it was. He was writing under Darius the Great, who was the guy who sent the Jews back and said, after 70 years, go rebuild your temple. So Zechariah is very specifically saying that these 4 fast days, and we'll unpack in a sec what they are, will in the future become occasions for joy and gladness, happy festivals for the house of Judah, when the temple is destroyed. So these 4 fasts have all to do more or less directly with the destruction of the temple. So the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th month, the fast of the 7th month, and the fast of the 10th month, without looking, or with looking at the italics just below, what's the fast of the 4th month and what's the fast of the 5th month. If the first month is where we have Pesach, so that's Nisan, 2nd month Iyar, 3rd month Sivan, 4th month Tammuz, and 5th month Av. So the 4th and the 5th month are Tammuz and Av. So the holidays, or non-holidays, the fast days that we have in Tammuz and Av, the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av, as we'll see, commemorate stages in the destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem. The fast of the 7th month, which is Tishrei, you might think, oh, that's Yom Kippur. It's not Yom Kippur. It's Tzom Gedalia. So Yom Kippur comes from the Torah. Tzom Gedalia, which we always think would be a great idea to practice the day after Rosh Hashanah, to take a day off of eating after eating far too much. is a fast day commemorating the assassination of a Jewish governor of Judea, which led to bad political developments for the Jews. And then the fast of the 10th month, the one we just had, is the 10th of Tevet, also connected to the destruction of the temple. So I can see, great. So we already have this idea. At the time of Zechariah, which we know is after the destruction of the first temple, these fasts are already in effect. And they're in effect to the extent where he's like, in the future, maybe we'll be able to stop doing these fasts when everything goes back to being good again and we have a temple again. But they're already, at his time, fully established. Let's have a look. You may be very familiar with this text, but Madalena, scroll down for us, thanks, to Mishnah Ta'anit. So this was the same tractate of Mishnah that we were looking at last week, about fast days that are instituted when the rains haven't come. Here, we hear their discussion of, in particular, the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av. So would somebody else like to read for us the English of Mishnah Ta'anit, where it says 5 calamitous matters occurred to our forefathers? Just go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to read for us.
I'll read.
Great, thank you.
Okay. The Mishnah discusses the 5 major communal fast days. 5 calamitous matters occurred to our forefathers on the 17th of Tammuz, and 5 other disasters happened on the 9th of Av. On the 17th of Tammuz, the tablets were broken by Moses when he saw that the Jews had made the golden calf. The daily offering was nullified by the Roman authorities and was never sacrificed again. The city of Jerusalem were breached. The general Apostamos publicly burned a Torah scroll, and Manasseh placed an idol in the sanctuary.
Great. Let's just pause there for a sec. What do we notice about these different occasions, Ruth or anybody else? What's similar? What's different between these 5 different things that
they all involve some kind of worship or not worship, but negating of Judaism, whether it's the Torah or the city walls. I mean, certainly the Romans, and Moses got mad because they had made an idol, and then Manasseh placed an idol in the sanctuary. Those 2 are similar.
Right, yes. Okay, so they're calamitous, they're tragic, and they have to do with idolatry or the cessation of proper worship. I guess you could say the city walls of Jerusalem are breached. That's the city itself is holy. It's the locus, the central locus for Jewish holiness. Okay, but what's different about these dates? Anyone want to say what's surprising about this list?
It's interesting. It goes from Sinai to the Romans.
Right.
It's a long period.
Yeah, it's a long period, exactly. Yeah. And the Romans are kind of in the middle, actually. Then it goes back to stuff that happened in the time of the kings and the prophets. Right. Weaving them together. Yes, Sylvia.
And it's also really including Sinai is a reflection of a direct and brutal attack on Jews and Judaism.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's the unifying feature. Esther?
Well, even Manasseh, though, he goes against and he was a terrible king. But he goes against, Jewish teaching. He puts an idol in not just worshiping an idol. He puts it in. What did it say? Did he put it in the temple?
Yeah, in the sanctuary. Yeah.
He was as bad as the Romans.
Right. So we've got the Romans. We've got the earlier period of the kings. We've got Jews acting out against Judaism. We've got non-Jews acting out against Judaism. But we've got 4 dates which are more or less from recorded history, let's say, or two or three dates which are like sort of in living memory. 1 date, Menashe, which is from scripture, but sort of within the period of what we could call history. But then we've also got Moses. We've got the interjection of this idea that, it was on the 17th of Tammuz that Moses came down and saw the golden calf and smashed the tablets, which the rabbis do get to by counting 40 days and nights backwards from Yom Kippur twice, because he was up on the mountain again for another 40 days and nights, but then they somehow read it that there was another 40 days and nights somewhere in there. I forget exactly, but there's, these rabbinic calculations can be a little difficult to follow. So they're not just getting it totally out of nowhere, but they want to anchor it to a date of something that happened in the Torah, right? Okay, so Ruth, will you read for us the second part about what they're remembering on Tisha B'Av?
On the 9th of Av, it was decreed upon our ancestors that they would all die in the wilderness and not enter Eretz Yisrael. And the temple was destroyed the first time in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, and the second time by the Romans. And Beitar was captured, and the city of Jerusalem was plowed as a sign that it would never be rebuilt. Not only does one fast on the 9th of Av, but from when the month of Av begins, one decreases acts of rejoicing.
Right. So you may have heard Mishenichnas Adar, Marabim B'Simcha, when Adar, the month of Adar starts, we increase in joy. This is the parallel statement. Mishenichnas Av, Mim'atin B'Simcha. When Av enters, we reduce in Simcha. Okay, so what about these dates connected to the 9th of Av? Anything similar? Not similar to what we just saw about the 17th of Tammuz?
It goes from the Exodus to the first temple and Babylonians, and then the second time by the Romans. I mean, it's really covers quite a range of years.
Yes. And I would say this one even goes up closer to their days. The thing about Beitar, the foil of Beitar and the plowing of Jerusalem, this is really like in living memory for the authors of the Mishnah.
What is Beitar? I don't know. I never saw.
Mom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Beitar was the stronghold of Bar Kokhba. So after the temple was destroyed in 70 CE, then another 70 years later, there was this briefly successful, for 2 or 3 years, successful revolt by Bar Kokhba, which was then brutally crushed by the Romans, leading to an even worse decimation of. It was at that point that Jerusalem was really destroyed.
And does the metaphor of the city of Jerusalem being plowed relate to not only the second temple, but just the total dispersal of the Jews?
I think that's the idea. It was like it's done, and as we know, the Rabbinic Academy moved from Jerusalem to Yavne,
right?
And for many generations, Jerusalem was not
and saved us, and
yes, took the seed of our intellectual history and planted it in new soil. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm thinking to myself that out of the pandemic came Zoom, so we could all meet today.
Yeah.
And out of this terrible destruction of our temple came a religion that, I mean, we're still here, folks.
That's right. And whether or not we would still actually be here if what was expected of us was offering animal sacrifices is a good question. Right. Certainly, the intellectual tradition is a lot more portable and develops in interesting ways, which I think is a good segue to the next to our next topic. There's a wonderful book called the Book of Our Heritage by Eliyahu Kitov, who was an early Olah to the land of Israel in the middle of the 20th century, and it's a 3-volume book, but it's basically about the calendar, or all the things that occur within the calendar. Within the month of Tevet, he gives this. I just copied, took a picture of the pages, where he gives us a whole list of other fast days that I don't know anyone who observes these fast days. It's the next source down. Thank you, Madalena. It's this page. Yeah. So I mean, maybe you can see, but thank you. So again, you can see some of these dates are biblical. Some of these dates were in the Torah, like the 1st of Nisan, that's when the sons of Aaron died. The 10th, that's when Miriam died, and the well was stopped. But some are later, like the 25th of Iyar, Rabbi Shimon and various others were slain by the Romans. This is the bit that we read on Yom Kippur about like various horrible executions. And then it can continue. So that, you know, so it's weaving back and forth things that happened. No, this is the list. So actually, I don't know where this list comes from, other than it coming from Eliyahu Kitov. I don't know when they were all instituted. Megillat Ta'anit is actually the opposite. It's days on which you shouldn't fast. These are days on which people do fast, and some of them, you know, on the cross page you see the 7th of Adar, which is the day that Moses died, is still observed, I know, as a fast by the Chevra Kadisha, who identify that date as, you know, as the origin of their service. And I'm sure there are some people who do fast all of these dates. And I think, you know, in the medieval and early modern period, fasting was really a lot more popular than it is now. You know, it's also the case, I think I read in these pages, some people fast every Monday and Thursday. You know, some people, like, it's considered a very clarifying and cleansing practice to fast. And so the point being, whether these fasts were instituted at the time of the rabbis of the Mishnah, or rather later by later and you know, fasting is also big in Christianity, so presumably in the Christian context, it was encouraged. You know, it was like, oh, we're pious too, let's us fast. If they fast Fridays, we'll fast Thursdays and Mondays. You know, so I don't know when all these fast days were instituted, but just interesting to note how fast days actually proliferated throughout the Jewish calendar, and now we've sort of dialed it back to the six main ones of the year, namely Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av, 17th of Tammuz, 10th of Tevet, and then the fast of Esther, which originally was a 3-day fast that occurred in Nisan, if you look at this list, and got altered over time to be the day before Purim. But it was actually three not contiguous days, but 3 days in a week period or actually I think it's 3 consecutive days, but you could eat at night just before Pesach, which is interesting. So we've dialed it back a bit since then. Oh yeah, and Tzom Gedalia is our 6th fast, and some people also fast other occasions. But nothing like this list. I don't know anyone personally who fasts all these fast days. Maybe someone here does. All right, so that's like topic number 1, fast days, the development of fast days by the rabbis. The second thing I'd like to, you can zoom back out a little bit. So we already know that this idea that our first mitzvah is what we'll read in a couple of weeks' time, that this month should be for you the first of months. It should be for you the first month of the months of the year. So there's the rabbi's emphasis, this lachem, that this gives over into human control, the ordering of the calendar, but it's also like the beginning of the Jewish experience. This is how we identify ourselves, by having our own calendar, by organizing our time. You know, the Sforno remarks on this. Sforno is a 16th century Italian commentator, or no, 17th century. He says explicitly, because when you're a slave, you don't have control of your time. So this is all about the shift from being slaves in Egypt to having our own self-determination. Having a calendar is deeply linked with that. So we already know that there's this idea that like this verse is very important, and there's a strong connection from the origin of the calendar between Judaism and the moon. But then there's this like really interesting intellectual thread that I found in quite a few sources between like actually identifying the people Israel with the moon. So you remember in the book of Genesis, where it says somewhat seemingly self-contradictory statement that God makes the 2 great lights, Hamaorot Hagdolim. No distinction is made between them when they're first introduced, 2 great lights. But then it immediately afterwards says, this is on the 4th day of creation, El Hamaor Hagadol, the big light to rule over the day, Vet Hamaor Hakaton, L'mamshelet halayla, and the little light to rule over, to have dominion in the nighttime, and also the stars. So there's a very famous story in the Talmud, which you may have studied before. It's a great text. We'll look at it together. Madalena, can you scroll down a little bit more? This is from Chulin. Here we go. Yeah, Chulin 60b. So yeah, would someone like to read this for us? Anybody? Go on, Ruth.
Okay. Were we starting at Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi?
Yeah.
Okay. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi explains, when God first created the sun and the moon, they were equally bright. Then the moon said before the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, is it possible for two kings to serve with one crown? One of us must be subservient to the other. God therefore said to her, the moon, interesting that it's a female,
Yeah.
if so, go and diminish yourself. She said before him, Master of the universe, since I made a correct observation before you, must I diminish myself? Boy, she's mouthy.
Yeah. So right, first thing that happens is like it's put. So this is like obviously an imagined dialogue, right? But it's imagined that the moon was the one who pointed out this discrepancy. It's like I was supposed to be we're both supposed to be great lights, but then one of us is supposed to be small. And then God's like, oh, okay, yeah, you should become small. And then the moon very reasonably said, why should I become small? I'm just pointing out something accurate in the text. Okay, so
it punished the whistleblower.
Exactly, they punished the whistleblower. Exactly. Continue.
We have to go scroll up. God said to her, down at the bottom. That's okay. God said to her, as compensation, go and rule both during the day along with the sun and during the night.
Okay, so fair enough. We can see the moon in the daytime and in the nighttime. Yeah. We obviously can't see the sun in the nighttime.
Right. You got to scroll up though.
Oh, I can't. I'm not handling it. Madalena.
Okay, there we go. Good. She said to him, what is the greatness of shining alongside the sun? What use is a candle in the middle of the day? God said to her, here, mix it up to her. Go, let the Jewish people count the days and years with you, and this shall be your greatness. She said to him, the Jewish people will count with the sun as well, as it is impossible that they will not count seasons.
Which are the solstices and equinoxes.
They will not count seasons with it, as it is written, let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. God said to her, go.
Okay, so let's pause 1 sec. Okay. So just to unpack that a bit. So this thing of what use is a candle in the middle of the day is in Aramaic. So that's clearly a phrase that was in use at the time.
It was an idiom. Maybe an idiom.
It's an idiom, right? It's good. It's a good idiom. What use is a candle in the middle of the day? And then she quotes back to when he said, okay, so you're not impressed by this, you're going to shine in the daytime too. How about that you're going to be the basis of the Jewish calendar? And the moon very reasonably replies, well, it's actually a lunisolar calendar. And indeed, this is what you yourself have ordained, God, in Genesis 14, that both these lights will be for seasons and for managing the calendar, as we discussed previously.
Isn't it interesting? She gets a proof text.
Yes, yes. The moon is very scholarly. The moon is a very scholarly moon. Okay, continue.
All right. God said to her, go, let righteous men be named after you. Just as you are called the lesser Hachatan light, there will be Yaakov Hachatan, that is Jacob, our forefathers, Shmuel Hachatan the Tanah, and David Hachatan, that is King David.
All of these guys get called Hakatan.
Yeah. Right. God saw that the moon was not comforted. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, bring atonement for me, since I diminished the moon. And the Gemara notes that this is what Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says. What is different about the goat offering of the new moon, that it is stated with regard to it, for the Lord. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, this goat shall be an atonement for me, having diminished the size of the moon.
Okay, So the punchline is, or rather kind of actually when you get to the end, you realize this is the whole story is explaining this specific feature in the text in Numbers, which is what is the festival calendar in Pinchas, where we get all the offerings for the different occasions, which is this is the offering for Rosh Chodesh, the Midbar, Numbers 28:11. It starts on the new moons. You shall bring these various Ola offerings, Then we've got verses 12, 13, and 14, which I skipped. And then at the end it says, Useir izim echad, and one goat, lechatat laHashem, for a sin offering to God, or for God, in addition to the Ola and perpetual offerings and their various libations and accompanying.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Do people have to bring the goat offerings?
The people.
Why doesn't God bring the goat offerings? He's the one who did it.
Well, I mean, God made all the goats, right, and all the people. Right. So, I guess it's a delegated responsibility. But basically, you can read that lechatat laHashem. The obvious way to read that would be as a sin offering for God, offering to God, same as all the other offerings. But Reish Lakish flips it on its head, and it says, "Oh no, actually, God is making an offering because of this business of diminishing the size of the moon." And it's sweet, but you get all this back and forth about like, oh well, actually the moon, this is what's good about the moon, and this is what's good about the moon, and this is what's good about the moon. The moon is still not satisfied by it, but it's a way of sort of like pointing out all the ways that, like, even though the moon is smaller, it has some advantages over the sun. And this idea of the moon will one day be restored to its full size is a sort of messianic idea in Judaism. And also, by the way, very much connected to the renaissance of the feminine divine and the female centrality within Judaism, which we're very much witnessing in our generations. This is seen as being like, it's the moon will one day, because it's not an accident, as you point out, Ruth, that the moon is a female. Yeah.
Well, it is female because of our the menses, I think.
Right.
That's that is a monthly thing, and it comes with the waxing and the waxing and the waning of the moon. So
yeah. Yes, exactly. And although it's actually not universal in cultures across the world that the sun is always masculine and the moon is always feminine, there is, I think, a tendency. And it's also part of this, like, oh, well, men are bigger and stronger. Women have their different kind of, like, they cast a different light. So this idea that, so one of the developments of this idea that Israel is actually like the moon, we see in the Midrash in Shmot Rabbah. This is a couple more sources down, source number 16, where we're going to scroll down quite a bit. I gave you the beginning, but basically, let's see, where are we? Yeah, can you scroll down a little bit further, Madalena? Yeah, so here we have this idea that taking a verse from Psalms, that somehow it seems to be connecting the righteousness will flourish, you might think, forever in well-being, ad bli yarach, until there is no more moon. I could understand that as like until the seas run dry, until the end of days. But the way that this Midrash is understanding it is that, like, everything has its season, and even the righteous ones will wane like the moon wanes. That's just how it goes. And so they connecting that. By the way, there's an entire chapter in Shmot Rabbah on this verse from this month shall be for you the first of months. It's very, very important. And that was just in Shmot Rabbah. I'm sure the other Midrashim also, there are large chunks of, many, 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 many texts. Can you scroll down a little bit more for us, Madalena? I will read it from my printout. Thank you. So before the Holy Blessed One took Israel out of Egypt, he made it known to them the illusion that their royalty would endure for them for 30 generations. As it is stated, this month shall be for you the first month. And what that's implying is just as the month is 30 days, your royalty will be for 30 generations. And then they count the generations from Abraham until Solomon. And from Abraham until Solomon, things were just getting better and better and better. Or like there were 15 great generations. Beg your pardon, 15 great generations. Solomon is the full moon. He's the apex, the biggest and most powerful ever. But then from there, the only thing that can happen after you reach your fullness is you begin to wane. And so then it gives us 15 generations from Rehoboam, Aviah, Asa, Yehoshaphat, Jehoram, Ahaziah, Joash, etc., 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 all the way to poor old Zedekiah, who, it didn't end well around the time of the 10th of Tevet. So that is and you might remember that Zedekiah is blinded by Nebuchadnezzar's forces. So here's an image also of like the light of the moon being extinguished, like we went really back into the darkness with this image of blinding. So the Jewish people are cyclical, like the moon, and this means also that it wanes, not just that it waxes. But then you'll see in the medieval period, let's scroll down a little bit more, this sort of celebration or rejoicing of the fact that the moon is always reborn. Even though it always dies, it always, goes back into the darkness, it is always reborn again. And this is a way to feel reassured by these cyclical changes in fortune, that the moon will grow again. We also get, scroll down a bit more, please, Madalena. So yeah, keep going. We're gonna just skim through this. We also, keep going. Thank you. We also get this idea that just as Esau is big and counts his days by the sun, which is appropriate. Actually, scroll up a tiny bit, would you? Jacob counts by the moon, which is the lesser. However, as we already saw with the yeah, that's a good place. That's a little further down. A little further down. Yeah, thanks. Just as we saw in God's dialogue with the moon, these kind of reassuring things that you shine in the day and in the night. This is seen as being this world and the world to come, right? So just as Esau's like the sun, he's shining really brightly right now, Rome, it's not going to last. Rome's going to have no place in the world to come. But Jacob counts by the moon, which is like barely visible in the day, but in the nighttime or the world to come, it will be very bright. And similarly, when the light of Rome is no longer dominating the sky, then the light of Israel will be much more apparent.
Any idea when this was written? I mean, obviously it's written
in the
Romans were around, but
yeah, the Midrash Rabbah, I mean, no one really knows. They were kind of put together by about the 8th or 9th centuries.
Oh, okay.
That's so fairly late, but they probably are oral traditions that go back. Mm-hmm. And the language is pretty it's like sort of Mishnaic. So I mean, they could be 500 years old at least. Into it. Some of the material is presumably really much older, but yeah, no one really knows.
I'm thinking of those times when you walk outside and it's in the afternoon, but you can see the moon there. It's eerie. It's like spooky, but it's there.
Yeah,
it tells you that it's always there.
Right. You know what? The stars are always there too. It's just an interesting feature that the atmosphere gives us a bubble of light, so we can't see them most of the in the daytime, but they're there all the time. So then the other thing that I want to point out is this this kind of preference actually for being the small one, the white one. The Esav is called red. His food is red. His land is red. His warriors are red. His clothing is red. Because Esau receives his strength from the sun, which is red, and the Netzach Israel gives us a bunch of proof texts, which I didn't give you all in translation, but every single one of them there's a proof text. You may be familiar with Daniel Boyarin, who wrote this book, I guess it was probably about 20 years ago now, about Jewish masculinity, and how Jewish masculinity had really defined itself as being like not Roman, not Greek or Roman. Like those guys can go work out at the gym and be big beefcakes. We are going to sit in the academy and be, you can call us soft and feminine if you like. That's fine. That's our ideal of masculinity.
Tell that to Mark Zuckerberg.
I mean, he doesn't look like the greatest hunk in the world to me. Also, maybe not the greatest Talmid Chacham, but maybe he's trying. I mean, you made a good invention. So yeah, there's one more thing that I would like to point out here, which is the idea that anti-Semitism also moves in cyclical patterns, that unlike other forms of oppression, which are pretty strong always, there's this curious feature with anti-Semitism where the Jews kind of like, they have it okay. Everyone's like, Jews, why are you worried? You're rich and powerful. And then it all gets taken out again, right? So the kind of some interesting connections there too, which is still echoing through with this kind of like identification with the moon. Someone just said something in the chat. Let me have a look. Right. The moon is a satellite of the Earth, says Rhea. The moon circles our planet, and our planet has changing seasonal tilts. These stories are childish. Yeah, they are. I mean, you could say that all myths are there to explain how things got to be the way they are. But just because, I mean, and yeah, it probably wasn't the case that the moon ever had an argument with the creator and got reduced in size. It's a device for conveying what we think about the moon and how the moon is important to us. Yeah, Ruth.
Well, I'm thinking too, I used to teach myths in my high school classes, and there are ways to explain many natural occurrences. But the Romans measured time by the sun. And I think that this is at least an attempt to show that while our seasons are, and our calendar is by the lesser of the two lights, we are always there and we always renew ourselves. And I think it's it may be childish, but it's a feel-good story.
It's a feel-good story with also like a real recognition of reality that like it's not all rebirth, there's death as well, you know. Yeah, I think you're right. It is you know, it's a way of saying we're different, but the way we do things is special too, and it also has its benefits. And maybe you'll see in the long haul that our culture also has some staying power. Yeah, Ruth.
Is it Kohelet, to everything there is a season?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, what was it? The doors turn, but you know, a time to be born, a time to die. This is the way life goes.
Yeah, exactly. So this this acceptance of the seasonality of things. You know, there's within Roman culture or Egyptian culture, there's a big emphasis on immortality. At least the emperor or the pharaoh is going to live forever. Their body's going to die, but they're going to live forever. There's this desire to live forever. I don't think Judaism quite has that. It has this like, oh yeah, everything waxes and wanes, and that's good. That's part of the balance. We appreciate that. All right, so we have a little bit more time, so let's get into our next topic, which is this fascinating document, Megillat Ta'anit. So the original document is in Aramaic, and it's just a list of dates. It doesn't have any explanation for what happened on these dates. It just says these are dates that you shouldn't fast, and in some cases you also shouldn't give eulogies, hespeds. But already in an early period, a tradition of interpretation written in Hebrew became attached to Megillat Ta'anit, and scholars call this the scholion, which is the Greek word for comments or interpretations. The scholion identifies and explains the events mentioned in the Megillah. Thus, it supplements each of the dates in the Megillah with various types of stories, legends, and homilies that are directly or indirectly relevant to the holidays. The Scholion includes large sections that have parallels in the Talmud and in rabbinic literature in general, but nearly half of it is unparalleled in other extant sources. Fascinating. I never heard of this in my whole life. Quite extraordinary. So there's I'm not sure whether you're seeing this on your screen, but it's all there on the source sheet if you want to go look. Much of this research came from reading articles on thetorah.com, which is an incredible resource. It's Torah biblical studies by academics, by people, mostly Jews, mostly it seems religious Jews, who take the sanctity of the text very seriously, but are also historians and academics and philologists and subjecting it to critical scrutiny. It's a treasure trove. I've only just discovered this website. I'm really enjoying this website. So the Torah.com's article on the cancellation of Megillat Ta'anit says how long these national holidays remained marked as special after the destruction of the temple is unclear. However, both the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds record debate about whether the scroll remains authoritative. And we have various sources for where that discussion is occurring. So as mentioned before, so why were these holidays abandoned? The Bavli says that, like Zachariah said at the beginning, like one day Tisha B'Av is going to be a great holiday. It's going to be a great celebration when the temple's restored. Similarly, they said that the Bavli advances this idea that, well, we didn't have fast days during the period of the temple because everything was more joyful. So now that the temple's being removed, these days which previously were joyous enough to prohibit fasting are no longer joyous enough to prohibit fasting. So forget about that. That's the reasoning that they give. Although those days are not themselves turned into fast days, but they are no longer not fast days, if you see what I mean, days on which it's prohibited to fast. But the two holidays that survive are Purim and Hanukkah. So why do Purim and Hanukkah survive, do you think? What's different about Purim and Hanukkah from these other non-fast days you've never heard of before? Yeah, Sylvia, make sure that you're, yeah.
I think it's pretty clear that Purim and Hanukkah are, they may be fast days, but they are an absolute celebration of military victory.
Okay, so in the case of Hanukkah, yeah, military victory, yeah. Yeah,
and I think that's very significant for us because we rarely celebrate military victories. That's not in almost not in our DNA, but there it is.
But as I recall, the rabbis didn't like them for that, so they turned them into something else.
Oh, great! We're going to get into it. Okay, so so there's stories of victory, but various of these other like non-fast days were as well. And there are even some other dates in the calendar which have to do with Hanukkah. Like, in fact, interestingly, Nicanor is the 13th of Adar, which is just before Purim. So, okay, we've got this aspect of it's to do with success, winning, military victory, big celebrations. But Ruth is absolutely right. The rabbis were somewhat ambivalent about that. What else? Why else might Hanukkah and Purim have survived? Think like a rabbi. Think not like a rabbi who's like me. Think like a one of the Tanaim. Why, Sylvia? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's they tie in somewhat because we're under attack. We're under attack, and all of these situations basically we're under attack. And those two situations are victorious, but not everything else.
Okay, so maybe they liked it because they were happy endings. Madeleine, give us.
We were the underdog,
right?
I mean, well, by big time.
Yeah. Right. So let's scroll down quite a bit more. Keep going until I say when. A little bit more. Okay, pause. yeah, just scroll up a little bit. Here we go. So in the Talmud, in Rosh Hashanah 18b, they're discussing why Hanukkah didn't get cancelled. And Rav Yosef says, Hanukkah is different since it has a mitzvah, specifically this lighting of candles, right? It has its important mitzvah to perform. So, and Abaya says, no, so what? Let it be cancelled, and it's mitzvah along with it. But Rabbi Yosef says, Hanukkah is different since its miracle is so prominent. Like, basically, it's already it's like it has a big market share. Like, people really like Hanukkah. Or this mitzvah of lighting the Hanukkah candles is crucial in some way, is really important. By the way, as an aside, the blessing for lighting Shabbat candles is nowhere in the Talmud. Surprise. And in fact, this is a fascinating thing. It was in the generation of like Rashi and the medieval period. The men noticed that the women had started making a blessing, Lahadlik Ner Shel Shabbat, which the women, had adapted from Lahadlik Ner Shel Chanukah. And there's a fascinating bit in the Tosfot where they debate. They're like, what should we do? This bracha is not in the Talmud. The women just made this up. Should we stop them? And they basically come to the conclusion that no, we shouldn't stop them. We should say, oh yes, you're absolutely right, dear. That's how you're very clever that you knew that, even though it's not written anywhere. Or actually, I think they try to conceal from the women that it isn't written anywhere and that they've actually innovated it themselves. Anyway, so surprising though that may seem, actually our Shabbos candles blessing is based on the Hanukkah candles blessing, which, you know, linguistically it's not a big leap to change the blessings out, but actually the prototype blessing is the blessing on Hanukkah candles, not the blessing on Shabbat candles, which is a wonderful irony when we consider the importance of Shabbat versus the importance of Hanukkah. But basically that's the reason that the rabbis give. Hanukkah and Purim survive because they have mitzvot, and we don't like to cancel mitzvot. Possibly also because these mitzvot make them more entrenched in public practice once people are actually doing the thing. But as Ruth pointed out before, actually the rabbis were pretty ambivalent, particularly about Hanukkah. As we know, the books of the Maccabees, there are 2 books of Maccabees, were not preserved in the Jewish canon. They were preserved in the Apocrypha. So if it had been up to the rabbis, we might not have the books of Maccabees that tell the story, the more original story of Hanukkah. And although it's all about the military victory, there's nothing about the miracle of lights. The whole thing about like there being one thing of oil and it could only last for one day, that is not in the books of Maccabees. But the books of Maccabees are also pretty religious in their framing of Judah Maccabee. He's a religious guy. He's always praying and beseeching God. At one point, I admit I have not read the books of Maccabees. I again read this on the Torah.com, but I trust it. It seems well researched to me. That at one point they discovered that some of the troops have illicit idols, and he makes sure that there's money is collected to make the proper offerings and expiation of this. And then all this business about being an 8-day investiture has a lot of like an 8-day celebration when they rededicate the temple. This has a lot of textual basis on why 8 days. In Bamidbar, when the Mishkan is originally in Vayikra and Bamidbar, I guess, when the Mishkan is invested, it's an 8-day thing, and of course there's also some connection with Sukkot, possibly indicating that when they first instituted this holiday of Hanukkah, they weren't really sure what to call it, so they called it like second Sukkot, or they tried to connect it with Sukkot, which has 8 days. However, the rabbis, add this thing in the Talmud that you get this idea of the miracle of the oil, which balances out the pure military victory thing that's being celebrated. And it's interesting that we could look more about how the diaspora communities and the Israel-based communities responded to Hanukkah and Purim over the centuries that they were coming into being. But at least one article that I found says, I believe the rabbis may have been the reason for this de-emphasizing of the military victory versus the miracle of the oil business was not just to make it more kind of religious. We're on source 32, but I'll read it aloud to you in case Madalena can't find it. Source 32. I believe the rabbis may have been trying to distance themselves from the Hasmonean association, which had such strong resonances with insurrectionist and militaristic periods in Jewish history, Judean history, especially the first great rebellion against Rome. The Bar Kokhba revolt, the final great rebellion against Rome, namely the Bar Kokhba revolt that we talked about a little while ago. In his final attempt at forcing the Romans out of Judea, Bar Kokhba and thousands of his loyalists led a massive revolt that devastated the Roman economy for years. Between 132 and 135 of the Common Era, Shimon Bar Kokhba, whose real name was Shimon Bar Kokhba, but he changed it to Son of the Star to give himself some messianic mystique, brought major disaster upon the Jews living in Rome and Palestine, but his rebellion against Rome turned sour and scores of thousands of Jews were killed. The possibility that Bar Kokhba saw himself as an inheritor of the Maccabean tradition is strengthened by the images on his coinage, which included images of the temple and objects with the temple, such as trumpets, palm branches, and lyres, and had the coins inscribed with phrases such as, "For the freedom of Jerusalem." These images on his own coins were a clear statement that he saw himself as a military figure protected by divine favor. Regardless of whether or not Bar Kokhba saw himself as an inheritor of the Maccabean legacy, the association between the two and the consequent anti-imperial or anti-government imagery would have been something from which the powerless rabbis may well have wished to dissociate. Celebrating rebellion could both lead their followers astray and cause problems for Jews with their local governments. So basically, after the catastrophic losses, they just didn't really want to associate with this military victory from the past because it was too dangerous. They didn't want to encourage people to do anything like that. We're almost out of time, so I'll leave you to read for yourself the various interesting things about Purim probably actually being a Persian New Year holiday that got assimilated into the calendar, and the various practices that we do, like Mishloach Manot and gifts to the poor, could just be sort of general celebratory practices. They don't actually seem to have all that much to do with the story itself. But I will just point out that whereas the books of Maccabees don't even make it into the Jewish canon, the scroll of the Book of Esther, Megillat Esther, is the very basis for how Judaism treats and understands the sanctity of all sacred texts. The Torah itself, actually all of the mitzvot, which we learn about how to, both in terms of the physical objects, like how to create what's kosher materials and parchment and quills and inks, all of the stuff that we learn about how you can and can't make a Torah scroll actually comes from how you can and can't make a Megillah. And it's in Masechet Megillah, which I brought a couple of sources from there towards the end of the sheet. It's in Masechet Megillah that we actually get all various things that we think of as being entirely normative, such as how many aliyot to the Torah you have on a weekday, on a Rosh Chodesh, on Shabbat, or on a holiday. That's in Masechet Megillah. Where blessing before and after reading from the Torah. Also, the calendar of the special Shabbatot, like Shkalim and Parshat Zachor and so forth. All of these are described in Masechet Megillah. So different in time and place, but a little bit of the same echo of how, in the case of the Hanukkah candles giving rise to the Shabbos candles blessing, that was a sort of popular innovation. But this is actually rabbinic tradition that the The sanctity of the book of Esther, which, as we might remember, in the Hebrew version doesn't have any mention of God. Not true in the Greek version, which is a lot more religious, has various prayers and prophetic dreams and stuff, is taken as the baseline model for sacred text in general, which is pretty interesting for something which the rabbis were probably a bit ambivalent about as well. Maybe I would say they felt safer with Purim because the Purim story happened far away. And they were less dealing with, it felt more removed from the reality they were dealing with than the story of the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, and Hanukkah. That would be my suggestion. All right, this is, we are at the hour, so I just want to give a couple minutes of open space for anyone who wants to say anything or ask anything. There are a bunch more, like just excerpts from various interesting articles from thetorah.com, which you can look at in your own time. And next week we will we'll be coming all the way up to the modern period and looking at how sort of psychological themes as well as nationalistic themes have continued to play through the ways our calendars have developed in the intervening, I guess, 1500 years since these texts. So I hope you'll join me again for that. And in the meantime, have a great week. And thank you so much for being here. I think that's the end of our session.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Be well, everybody.